I ask you that, who are you? How do you answer that? Or how do people generally answer that?
Usually with their name.
Okay.
Or how they.
And what does the name tell me about you? Zero. Zero. Although I do have some theories. In my entire life, I have met many, many angels. I think I've probably met one, maybe two people named Angel who were actually good. So I get, whenever someone pops my route, I go, Angel, always the benefit of the doubt. I have an angel right now I like. But that's pretty rare, and so it's a joke among the teachers actually. How many angels do you have this year? Because it's a weird thing. Angel. Well, I guess not such a weird thing, because Satan was an angel too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
They might reveal who they are, they might give you their job first.
Okay, so for example, what's the jobs that they would have?
Lawyer.
Lawyer. Because you all have a job right now, you're supposed to. What job are you supposed to have? Student. Yeah. And like people say, how are you going to get paid for it? Because you're shit at it. That's why. You're like you don't get fired, i.e. kicked out. Well, let's say that someone's a lawyer. So what sort of an identity, what sort of a costume is the lawyer going to wear? Okay. Explain. Don't think literal here. Don't think like just what like a costume being what a person wears. Do lawyers walk around and go, let me fix your tie? Oh, let me iron your pants for you. So what's that?
Unbiased.
So they're supposed to be unbiased. They're supposed to be. What other things are expected from lawyers in their costumes?
They might want to be like a little intimidating.
Okay, so there you go. So they want to be intimidating. That's part of the costume of being a lawyer.
Show that they have confidence.
They're supposed to be confident. Even if they're not, they're supposed to pretend to be confident.
They want to seem trustworthy.
It's also part of it to seem trustworthy. So these are all things that a lawyer's costume is based off of. Are lawyers unbiased? Well, no. They're hired to represent one side or the other. Are they intimidating? Not usually. Not usually. The intimidating thing about lawyers is not them, it's the law. In other words, it isn't that they can do anything personally. It's that there's structures that lawyers are like professional elementary school children who can't really get much done on their own, so they have to go run and find an adult to do it for them. They just follow the paperwork to have adults work on their behalf. Same is true. Are they confident? Not especially. That's why they have to rely on this. Are they trustworthy? Are lawyers trustworthy? Yeah, do we sit there and look at it? I mean, how many of us look at lawyers and go, probably a trustworthy person?
No.
Yeah, we have this stereotype. Whether they are or not, some are, sure. But that's the stereotype that we have. But in any event, this is the costume that they're supposed to be wearing. And so lawyers will check each other on this. They'll give each other advice on this kind of stuff. As a student, there's a costume that you're supposed to be wearing. You're supposed to be someone who's curious. You're supposed to be someone who's hardworking. You're supposed to be somebody who actually wants to take advantage of opportunities to create a better future than they otherwise would have without education. But I guess in the same way that this applies, are there some who are like that? Yeah, I suppose so. But overwhelmingly, I don't know. I don't even have to ask the question. Y'all can answer it for me, for yourselves. And besides, it doesn't really matter if everybody else is like that. The question is, are you like that? If so, great. If not, and we check each other. But even within that context of being a student, you guys are not just wearing the student costume. You're also wearing the costume of your peers. In other words, you're expected to behave certain ways by your peers. And the ways in which you're expected to behave by your peers is different from the way that you're expected to behave as a student, which is also different, perhaps, than the way that you're expected to behave by parents, maybe, in some cases. But these things all have to kind of interact, and we're trying to make sense of all these kinds of things. In other words, this is something that, in a certain sense, is supposed to be rebellious. And yet, it's funny that this is supposed to be a rebellious character, and yet this is probably the most conforming human being I've ever met in my life. All walking around the same character. A person who's afraid to act differently among their peers, but is able to behave, but is trying to behave rebellious in front of teachers. Which, of course, this is ultimately what comes of this. I remember almost none of the names of these people. Very few teachers ever do. And yet the ways in which we behave when we're younger, those are the things that stay with us for the rest of our lives. In other words, I hear people who would just complain about their math teacher and how stupid they are now, whatever they are, all these horrible things. And yet that math teacher probably has no idea that you even exist. Or even if, I actually have had students I've come across them like years later, happens all the time, and they'll say, oh man, I had you when I was over there. And they go, you must have hated me. And I'm not joking, man, I'm not making this up. 9 out of 10 times, I have no recollection of who that person is. And I'll ask, why would I have hated you? What did you do? Oh, because I talked a lot. Well, if you talked a lot, then you were entertaining me. Because the more you talked, the less I had to. So no, I wouldn't have hated you. I would have been entertained by you. And if you didn't get anything out of the class, well, that's why I'm coming across you right now at Walmart, when you're on your shift. Now, by the way, that's a true story. That's happened on several occasions. Movie theaters, Staples, Walmart. Not that there's anything wrong with those places. But if I said that to them, which I did do, while they were in classes, and they would have fast-forwarded in their lives by 5 years, 10 years, they would never have said, oh, that's going to be me. They'd have been like, no, I'm going to be making moves in silence and stacking cash. No, dude, you're stacking boxes. I'm watching you, bro. There's nothing wrong with that, again. But it's just this matter of, is that the life that we would have chosen? Or would we have made different decisions? Because the costumes that we do wear, they impact us, obviously. It's like the ways in which we dress. Do they matter? Of course it matters. Of course it does. Anybody who says that the way you dress anybody who says that doesn't matter is lying to you, or they're trying to sell you something. They're trying to be compassionate, but they're lying to you. Of course it matters the way you look. People treat you differently based off of how you look. People treat you differently based off of how you dress. And it doesn't mean you have to have the nicest clothes in the world, but geez, you can wash them. You can present yourself differently. You can take a shower. And I get some people say, oh, I can't. I don't have access to it. Fine. But you can still comb your hair. In other words, there's stuff that you can do. Rather than focusing on things you can't do, maximize the things that you can do, because the world will judge you differently off of this. They will judge you by the costume that you're wearing. You've heard before that, well, actually I've heard before it. Students will say that teachers have favorites. Teachers play favorites. Do teachers play favorites? Of course we do. Of course we do. Do I have favorite students? Of course I do. Do I have students that were 9 months in, I still don't know your name? Yeah, of course I do. But it's an issue with us if we're choosing to remain anonymous that way, choosing to remain unknown that way. That's not a good thing, because that's kind of presents that kind of tells us some things about how we're going to go forward in life for the person who bleeds in. And then we'll be hostile and angry at people for not knowing who we are. Well, what have you done to be known? It's like when we say that everyone deserves love. Do we really, though? Like, what's so lovable about you? What have you done to deserve it? Well, I'm just a human being. True. So is everybody else. But what sets you apart? What makes you unique? Because the brain seeks novelty. We look for things that are different in people. Why do we look for beauty? Because it's interesting. Same is true about hideousness as well, but in different ways. We look for things that establish people and set people apart. And if there's nothing about us that sets us apart, then there's a reason, by the way, that that's so incredibly unattractive to people. Because the only way, 100%, that there's nothing about you that distinguishes you is because you don't do anything to yourself to make yourself distinguishable. That's the unattractive thing. It isn't that a person is ugly. Of course, that hurts. But it's that a person sits in that and does nothing about it. It isn't just that a person is lazy. It's not just that a person hasn't achieved anything. It isn't that a person is unintelligent or uneducated. Those are all symptoms of a personality that refuses to improve itself. And I wonder how many of you would really want to be with somebody who has committed their lives to sitting in their basement, playing video games and covered in Cheeto dust, and then complain about how society is not fair. God, what's attractive about that? Even if the person's attractive, they're attractive until you actually have to have conversations with the person. And then you realize that wherever it is that you want to go in life, they're committed to staying exactly where they are. And if you stay tethered to that person, you'll only go as far as that tether allows you to go in life. At some point, you have to cut the tether if you want to go farther. Unfortunately, a lot of people choose not to. So the unattractive thing about people is not just the way that we look, or the way that we dress, or the way that we think, or the way that we talk. It's that refusal to improve in ways. It's that insistence on staying exactly as we are and not getting any better. Accepting that low place for ourselves. And it's not, and unfortunately, when we approach it, we oftentimes treat that person who chooses to do that with scorn. We get angry with them. We get frustrated with them. We get annoyed by them, which I don't understand why. It's their life to live. If that's the life that the person wants to live, then let them live that life. Yes, it's sad, because we know how it ends up. Angry, full of contempt, resentment, hostility towards society. Probably a lot of shitposting in their future. And that's exactly the person who will be rescued by the metaverse. Telling you the truth, man. That's exactly the person who's going to be signing up for the beta. Who signs up for the beta? The betas. It's not fun, though. Not funny. Sorry. It's not funny, though. It sucks. It's a person's life. You know? So these costumes are useful. They are useful. Oftentimes we think, man, you're just trying to fit in. Well, duh. Who doesn't want to fit in? A person who, there's a difference between wanting to fit in and being willing to compromise yourself to fit in. That's the bad part. When you're willing to compromise yourself, the meaningful things about yourself in order to fit in. That's the bad thing. It isn't just fitting in. If you're somebody, like I know a lot of people who just by nature of who they are, they fit into groups. People like them, they're popular, and they really are just being themselves. That's a pretty cool place to be. But for a lot of people, that's not where they are. And so you get to make that choice. Do I want to compromise who I am to fit in? Which if you do, fine. That's your life choice, and there's a lot of value in that. Like I was saying earlier, that people will give you opportunities based off of how you dress, based off of how you present yourself. But a big one, based off of how you speak. Based off of how you speak. People who talk to people like that. And I guess the question becomes, do you want to be with people like that? And I know a lot of people, out of a sense of insecurity and a lack of confidence and in a certain sense of a fear of having to move forward, will say, no, I wouldn't want to hang out with those people. Cool. No problem. Less competition for the rest of people. But that means you're going to be destined to stay where you are. You know? Try filling out a small business application, small business loan application. I'm going to make stacks of it. Great. Open your small business. Start filling out your paperwork without being a reader, without knowing how these things operate. Good luck. You think a bank is going to give a $1 million loan to a person who can't spell supposedly? Yes, by the way, those things do happen. I know people will say, oh, but there's autocorrect. If it worked, you wouldn't be saying supposedly. If those things worked, you wouldn't be saying these things wrong still. And I know, it sucks. It's hard to hear. It's not like I'm just picking on you and being an asshole, but I hope you understand why I'm saying that. Because I don't want you to go through life saying things like Salmon in front of the wrong people. I don't want you to go in front of the wrong people saying things like supposedly or could care less. Because I don't want you to be embarrassed. I'd rather you be embarrassed right now in silence, sitting there realizing you've been saying it wrong for the last few years, but then fixing it, so that you don't have to be embarrassed in front of people who actually matter in a few years. Yeah, there are a lot of things like this. This is one of the reasons. This is just one of the values of reading and learning. so that you can wear a proper costume. In order to be a lawyer, you have to know what a lawyer's supposed to be. In order to be a good one. In order to be a good model, I guess, quite literally, you have to wear a certain costume, physically a costume. If you want to be a good student, of course you have to know what a good student is supposed to be in order to do that. And by the way, a good student doesn't have to just mean in school. If you want to be an educated person, you have to know what that looks like. It's not, people say, oh, it's just reading a lot. No, it's not. Reading manga is not going to make you an educated person. And people say, they go, oh, but you learned about Japanese history. Okay. There are more efficient ways to learn about Japanese history than reading comic books. Of course. We're going to call it what it is. And by the way, manga is fine. I have no problem with it at all. But that's like watching the movie 300 to learn about the Spartans. It's entertaining, but is it legitimate? Yeah. And if you show up somewhere acting like it is, and you start talking about all the stuff you've learned about the Spartans, and it really just came from the movie 300, people who do know are going to know. And you might say, well, when would I ever do that? Well, if you ever did that, of course you're doing it because you're trying to fit in with people. And the people who you're trying to fit in with, those are the ones who actually know what really happened. People actually know about Japanese history or the Spartans or whatever the hell we're trying to pass as. But that's us trying to put on a costume that we're not quite ready for. So you have to know what the costume looks like. And then you can adorn that appropriately. It's like your life. What kind of life do you want to live? What do you want to be in life? Figure out what you want to be, and then adorn yourself accordingly. If you want to be an educated person, what do you have to do? Well, you have to adorn yourself with reading materials, things to study off of, learn off of, but also other people to learn from. If you want to be an athlete, of course you have to adorn yourself properly. And it doesn't just mean clothes, man. It doesn't just mean clothes. It means a bunch of other things that we put on. I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I have to yell at you guys about something. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?